Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. I was standing behind a rusted chain link fence, my hands gripping the wire like I could somehow will myself through it. The Carter family reunion was taking place right on the other side, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses echoing across the parking lot of the old community hall. They were all there, my father, my brother, aunts, uncles, cousins, and even a few of my nieces and nephews who probably didn't even know who I was anymore. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life in the military. I'd risen through the ranks, earned a reputation for making tough decisions, and yes, for having a little bit of controversy surrounding my name. Today was supposed to be a day of remembrance, a ceremony to honor the soldiers in the family, those who served, like my father and my brother Daniel. But instead, it felt like a reminder of how far I had fallen. A couple of months ago, I had sent a simple request to my dad, asking if I could attend, just to watch, to be there quietly, in the background, with no speeches or fanfare. I didn't need their approval or their acknowledgement. I just wanted to be part of something that, for most of my life, had been a source of pride. The reply had come quickly. "No, Evelyn, it's better if you don't come. It's not the right time." That was it. Simple, dismissive, the same thing they'd been telling me for the past 5 years. Since I'd come back from Syria, my name had been mud. My decision to disobey orders, to rescue 43 children trapped in a rebel stronghold, had cost me my military career, but the family had taken it further. They refused to even acknowledge the good I had done. All they saw was the mistake, the cost, the controversy. So now, here I was, on the other side of a fence, feeling every inch the outsider I'd become. My military uniform, which I had been so proud to wear, felt foreign. The medals that once hung on my chest now weighed me down, reminders of a past they wanted to forget. I watched as the guests mingled on the lawn, my brother Daniel shaking hands with some distant cousin while my father stood beside him, talking with other veterans, his back straight, his face as stoic as ever. He used to be my hero, my rock. But now, every conversation we had was filled with ice. Every attempt I made to reach out was met with nothing but silence. My dad had always been the one who taught me that loyalty to family came before everything. He drilled it into my head during those long hours in the training camps. Family sticks together, no matter what. You protect your own. But somehow, my loyalty hadn't been enough to keep me in their good graces. I turned my eyes toward the back of the hall, where a large banner read, "Carter Family Reunion, honoring our heroes." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been a hero once, but to them, I was no longer worthy of that title. A soft voice behind me startled me, pulling me from my thoughts. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be here." It was Daniel, my brother. He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, his expression somewhere between annoyance and guilt. He had always been the golden boy, the one who played by the rules, the one my father could count on, the one they all turned to when they needed someone to fix a problem. I had always been the rebel, the black sheep, the one who didn't fit into their perfect little picture. "I'm just watching," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, not like I'm going to disrupt anything. "Yeah, well, you've been gone for 5 years. You know the drill. We don't need the distraction." His words were cold, calculated, like he had practiced them 100 times in his head. I stared at him for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. This was my family, the ones I had bled for, the ones I had protected, the ones I thought would stand by me no matter what. But here we were. "Fine," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I guess I'm not part of this anymore." "Evelyn, don't make this harder than it has to be," Daniel said, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I looked at my brother one last time, then turned and walked away. There was nothing left for me here. As I stepped away, I couldn't help but glance back at the people inside the hall. My family. They would be celebrating, toasting, laughing, and I would be the one left behind, watching from a distance. Again, I knew deep down I'd never truly be part of their world again. Not after everything that happened, not after I made the decision to save those kids, but there was something more painful than that, something deeper than the exclusion. The realization that, in their eyes, I had become someone they didn't even want to remember, and that more than anything stung like nothing else. I stood there for a long time, watching from behind the fence as my family gathered on the other side, lost in their world of camaraderie and memories. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted through the air, mingling with the faint hum of a marching band setting up for the ceremony. My mind was foggy, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The Carter family reunion was a time for them to celebrate their shared history, their military lineage. My family had always treated these reunions like a sacred event, with speeches, awards, and the honor of being surrounded by fellow veterans. But now, it felt like a club I had been kicked out of, one that wasn't just exclusive but actively hostile to my presence. I had hoped to quietly watch from the outside, as if observing them was some kind of closure. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I had long since stopped trying to fit into their mold, and yet I still found myself wanting their approval. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a fleeting glance, a word of acknowledgement, something that would reassure me that I hadn't been erased from their history entirely. But just as I was turning away to leave, the ground beneath me seemed to tremble, a low hum vibrating through my chest. I looked up, confused, and saw a large convoy of military vehicles approaching, kicking up dust as it rolled down the street. HUMVEES, a dozen of them. They were packed tightly together, military flags flying from their sides, their engines roaring as they approached the ceremony. The crowd murmured in confusion. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity, my heart beating a little faster as the vehicles stopped at the entrance of the community hall. A few people in the crowd straightened up, their faces a mix of surprise and intrigue. What was this? Some special guest? The last Humvee rolled to a stop, and I squinted, trying to make out who was stepping out from the back seat. A figure in a crisp uniform, tall and imposing, emerged, a serious expression on his face. General Rhodes. My pulse quickened as I recognized the man. He had been my commanding officer during that fateful mission in Syria. He had been the one to order me to make the call that ultimately led to my disgrace, the one who ordered me to take the fall. A wave of emotion flooded through me. Anger, betrayal, confusion, each one more overwhelming than the last. I had never expected to see him here, not like this, not in front of my family. But what happened next stunned me. The general didn't just make his way toward the crowd, shaking hands with a few people in the front row. No, he walked directly toward me. The crowd around me fell silent, eyes darting between us as the general marched with purpose. I felt exposed, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Why was he coming over here? Had I been summoned to some kind of public reckoning? But he didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me. The air seemed to thicken with tension. "General Evelyn Carter," he said, snapping a sharp salute. The crowd gasped. I could feel every eye on me, the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down. My stomach dropped as I stood there, frozen in disbelief. I didn't know what to say. What had he just called me? General? Had the general just publicly acknowledged me as one of them, as someone deserving of respect? "General Carter," he repeated, his voice strong, unwavering. "It is an honor to stand here with you today. On behalf of the military, we salute you for your courage and for your unwavering commitment to saving those lives when it mattered most." The crowd stood still, their murmurs rising like a swell of disbelief. I could hear whispers, fragmented voices trying to comprehend what had just happened. General Rhodes had just publicly recognized me, not for the disgrace I had been labeled with, but for the very actions that had cost me everything. My father, who had been standing near the front with some of his old comrades, was paralyzed in place, unable to respond. He stood there, frozen, staring at me as if he had seen a ghost. I felt a strange sense of vindication, but it wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. My family had dismissed me for so long, and now, here was the general, the man who had orchestrated my fall from grace, standing with a salute that I had never once received from them. But still, my father didn't move. My brother Daniel, who had once held me in high regard, looked uncomfortable, his face a mix of confusion and frustration. There was a crack in the perfect facade they had built, a crack that was growing wider by the second. For a long moment, no one spoke. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to salute back, to say something, or just let the moment pass. Finally, General Rhodes turned to the crowd, addressing them as if nothing had happened. "This is General Evelyn Carter, a soldier who made the hardest of decisions when it mattered most," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone, his words ringing out clear and firm. "And today we honor her for that bravery. Her actions saved lives in Syria, and the truth of what she did is now, at last, being recognized." I felt the eyes of the crowd shift from me to the general, their expressions a mix of awe, confusion, and tentative respect. I wasn't sure if they believed it, if they were just processing the shock of what was unfolding. My father was still standing there, unable to speak. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to break, for someone to challenge the general's words. But no one did, not even Daniel. The general saluted once more before turning and walking away, leaving me standing there, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. I wasn't sure if I had won anything today. I wasn't sure if I cared. All I knew was that, in that moment, the family that had cast me aside had no choice but to recognize me, even if they didn't know what to do with that recognition. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a quiet sense of vindication. The crowd had slowly returned to their conversations, but the air was thick with unspoken words, the reverberations of General Rhodes's salute still hanging in the space between us. I stood there for a moment, unable to move, processing the strange mixture of relief and anger swirling inside me. The recognition had come, but it wasn't the way I had imagined. It had been forced, a public declaration that exposed the painful truth that my family had been hiding from themselves for so long. I wasn't the outcast anymore, but that didn't mean they'd ever accept me back. The general had returned to the front of the hall, and the microphone buzzed back to life as he stepped up to the stage. He had everyone's attention now, and it wasn't just my family who was listening. The whole crowd was waiting for the next move. I couldn't help but feel like a spectator in my own life, unsure of how to take the stage. I walked slowly toward the back of the crowd, slipping between families and veterans, my eyes never leaving my father's still, rigid form. He hadn't looked at me since the general had left, and I knew, without a doubt, he didn't know how to process what had just happened. It was more than a public acknowledgement. It was a challenge to the narrative my family had clung to for years. It was the truth, laid bare for all to see. As I reached the far corner of the hall, General Rhodes's voice boomed over the speakers. "Today we are also here to correct the record," he began. "General Carter's actions in Syria have long been clouded by controversy, but I want you to hear it from me, as her superior officer. What she did was nothing short of heroic." The crowd had fallen into a hushed silence, and I could feel every word slicing through me like a blade. He was telling the truth, but it was more than that. He was shifting the narrative in front of everyone, dragging my family's lies into the light, forcing them to confront what they had always refused to believe. I could hear a soft murmur rippling through the crowd, an unsettling combination of disbelief and curiosity. He continued, his tone measured but firm. "General Carter disobeyed orders, yes, but she did so because the lives of 43 innocent children were at risk. The situation on the ground in Syria was untenable, and the mission would have failed if she hadn't made the call to save them. She acted with integrity when no one else would, and those children are alive today because of it." The words rang out, clear and unyielding, as if they were hammering a nail into the coffin of my family's judgment. The voices in the crowd shifted, some questioning, some still hesitant, but all of them forced to reckon with the truth. I turned, searching for my father. He was standing near the back, his shoulders tense, his face pale, his mouth set in a thin line. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on the ground, as if somehow trying to escape the weight of the moment. My brother Daniel was beside him, looking equally uncomfortable, but at least he had the decency to meet my gaze when I locked eyes with him. My heart raced as I approached them, each step bringing me closer to the scene I had longed for, but feared in equal measure. The quiet, expectant air of the room pressed against me like a physical force, and I could hear my own breath in my ears. "Dad," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. He flinched but didn't look up. Daniel did, though, his face unreadable as he stood at his side. "Dad, I need to talk to you," I said again, but this time my voice was firmer, a quiet command that I had never used with him before. "I'm not asking for an apology, but I need you to understand something." He still didn't respond, and for a long moment, I thought he might just walk away. But then, as if finally registering my presence, he glanced up at me, his face tight, his eyes cold. "What's done is done," he muttered, almost as if he were trying to convince himself. "It's in the past. Let it go." I shook my head, the frustration bubbling to the surface despite my best efforts to remain calm. "No, you don't get to do that, Dad. You don't get to sweep it under the rug like it was nothing. This has been my life for the past 5 years. You've turned your back on me. You've made me feel like I don't even exist." He stiffened, the muscles in his jaw tightening, but I couldn't stop now. "I saved those kids, Dad. I didn't do it for you. or for anyone else. But I did it because it was the right thing to do, and it cost me everything. It cost me my career, my place in this family, and for what? He didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, one that neither of us had ever been brave enough to cross. You've always said family comes first, I continued, my voice low but sharp. But when it came down to it, you chose everything else over me. The military, your image, your pride, and when I needed you the most, when I needed someone to believe in me, you turned your back. Daniel stepped forward, his voice quiet but insistent. Evelyn, you don't have to keep doing this. We know what you did. The general's already said it. I turned to him, my eyes blazing. No, Daniel, you don't get to make this easy for me. You don't get to play the middle ground anymore. I took a step closer to my father, my gaze unwavering. I spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, trying to be what you wanted me to be. But the truth is, you never wanted me to be anything more than the soldier you could control. And now? Now you don't know what to do with me. Finally, my father's eyes met mine. There was no warmth in them, no understanding, just the cold, implacable wall he had always put up between us. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he turned sharply and walked away, his shoulders stiff and his head held high. Daniel hesitated, then followed. I stood there for a long time, watching them walk away, the noise of the crowd swirling around me like static. I wanted to feel victorious, wanted to bask in the feeling of finally saying everything I had kept bottled up for years. But the truth was, I felt empty, like I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had gotten my truth, but it wasn't the closure I thought it would be. My family might finally have heard it, but I knew deep down that nothing would ever truly change. The ceremony went on as planned, though the air had thickened with an uncomfortable tension. I could hear the speeches from the stage, the clinking of glasses as more toasts were made, and the murmurs of the crowd slowly building back to normal. But for me, it was all background noise, distant and meaningless. I couldn't focus on the praise being given to my relatives, the veterans who had earned their place in the spotlight. I kept replaying my conversation with my father, my brother, and the crushing reality that even after everything, the acknowledgement from the general, the words I had spoken, I still felt like an outsider. My eyes kept wandering back to the entrance of the hall, where people were still trickling in, chatting, shaking hands, the same faces I had seen all my life, faces that never seemed to notice I had slipped from their narrative. As I walked away from the stage, a few veterans gave me respectful nods, but no one stopped to speak to me directly. It was as if the formalities of the day had already erased the tension, leaving me once again on the outside, watching everything unfold from a distance. My father and Daniel were still standing by the drinks table, their backs to me, their heads close together as they spoke in low voices. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language was loud enough. Daniel's stiff posture, his occasional glances in my direction, and my father's complete refusal to look at me said everything. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to steady as I walked towards them, hoping to somehow break the silence that had fallen between us. But before I could take another step, a voice cut through the air, sharp and full of disdain. Well, well, if it isn't the family disappointment. I turned around to find Aunt Maggie standing just a few feet behind me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Maggie was the one who always had something to say, the one who was never afraid to speak her mind, even if it meant rubbing everyone the wrong way. She had never been my biggest fan, but I'd never expected to hear something like that from her, not in front of everyone. I forced a smile, trying to keep my cool, but the sting of her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Aunt Maggie, I said, my tone as calm as I could manage. It's good to see you. She tilted her head, eyes glinting with a mixture of mockery and something else I couldn't quite place. Oh, I'm sure it is. You know, it's a real shame. You had all that potential, Evelyn. You were on track to be something great, but now look at you. Look at me, I repeated, my voice betraying the frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface. What, because I didn't toe the line like everyone else? Her smile was tight, almost bitter. No, because you did something that put the family's name in the dirt. We've spent the last 5 years pretending you didn't make that choice, pretending it didn't happen. She stepped closer, her words low but pointed. But the truth is, we all know what you did. You think that's going to be forgotten? I clenched my fists at my sides, feeling the heat of anger rising, but I held it in. I wasn't going to let her bait me. Not now, not here. No, I said, my voice steady. I don't expect you to forget, but I don't need your forgiveness either." She scoffed, her eyes flicking to my father, who hadn't budged an inch from his position by the drinks table. "You think he's going to give you the recognition you want? You think anyone here is going to care about your little hero moment?" The words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I had heard this before. I knew what she was doing, trying to get under my skin, to get me to react. She wasn't the only one. "I didn't do it for anyone here," I said, finally meeting her gaze with the same coldness she was giving me. "And I don't need your approval, but I'm not here to apologize for saving those kids, and I'm certainly not going to apologize for being the one who made the right call, even if it cost me everything." The tension between us was thick now, and I could see the flicker of something like frustration in her eyes. She opened her mouth to respond, but just then, my father's voice cut through the air. "Evelyn." He spoke my name like it was a warning, his tone clipped and stern. He looked at me, then at Maggie, his expression unreadable. "That's enough." I turned to face him, the anger rising inside me once more, but I bit it back. This wasn't the time to let it all explode. Not in front of the family, not in front of everyone who had already written me off. "Dad," I said, the words coming out more exhausted than I intended. "Do you even hear what she's saying?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at Daniel, who was standing silently beside him, watching the exchange with a pained expression. Finally, my father turned his attention back to me, his eyes cold but carrying an edge of something deeper, something I couldn't read. "Evelyn," he repeated, his voice softer now. Just let it go. Please." I felt something inside me snap, like a rubber band pulled too tight. The urge to push back, to force them to see me, to make them acknowledge me, was overwhelming. But instead, I did what I'd done so many times before. I swallowed it all. "You don't get it?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You never have, and I don't think you ever will." With that, I turned and walked away. I didn't need their recognition. Not anymore. I didn't need their approval, their respect, or their validation. What I needed was for them to stop pretending like I didn't matter. As I moved to the far side of the hall, I noticed people shifting, glancing at me from the corners of their eyes. The whispers started almost immediately. I could hear bits of conversation as I walked past. "Did you hear what the general said about her? Isn't she the one who saved those kids?" That must have been so hard on her. Some of them didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know what to make of me. And in a way, that was okay. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into their mold, trying to be what they wanted me to be. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't anyone's hero, and I sure as hell wasn't anyone's punching bag. I was just Evelyn Carter. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to accept that that was enough. The evening dragged on, though I barely noticed the passing time. The hall filled with laughter and music, the toasts and speeches fading into a distant hum as I stayed on the outskirts of the celebration. The moment I had shared with my father, my brother, and Aunt Maggie still clung to me like a heavy cloak, wrapping me in tension and frustration. I'd expected confrontation, expected anger or more words of dismissal. But after the general's recognition, something in the air had shifted. The family had been forced to face the truth about me, and though they hadn't fully processed it yet, I could tell they were struggling with the cracks that had appeared in the carefully constructed narrative of my fall from grace. I found a corner near the back of the hall and watched the crowd from a distance, pretending to scan the room for familiar faces. But I was really just watching the way everyone moved, the way they clustered together in their familiar groups, old comrades, distant cousins, the people who had always been on the inside while I remained just outside their circle. And yet, there was a strange sense of quiet satisfaction within me. The general had told my story, told the truth that I had been hiding for years. It wasn't a victory, not in the way I had imagined, but it was something. At least now, no one could claim ignorance. And still, the absence of my father's words echoed louder than the ceremony itself. He hadn't said a single word to me since General Rhodes's speech, not a word of recognition, not a look of understanding. He had simply gone back to his place, as though nothing had happened. I pushed the thought aside, trying to force myself to focus on the moment, but the bitterness lingered in the pit of my stomach. Hours passed, and I barely realized the evening had slipped into night. Most of the crowd had started to thin out. People began to slip away, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and heading for their cars or the nearest bar. That was when I saw him, my father. I had been standing by the edge of the hall, just outside the circle of those who were still talking, when I caught sight of him, standing near the door. His back was to me, but there was no mistaking the way his shoulders were hunched, the way he seemed to be deep in thought. I had expected him to leave early, just like he always did. But there he was, alone, standing in silence. A moment of hesitation passed as I looked at him. I didn't know what to do, whether I should approach him or just leave it all behind. I had been waiting for a confrontation, for some kind of apology or explanation, but as the minutes passed, I realized there was nothing left to say. What good would it do? We had already said everything that needed to be said, and yet, as the last few guests filtered out, I found my feet moving toward him, almost without my permission. I stopped a few feet away, not sure whether I should say something or just leave it be. I didn't want to seem desperate. I didn't want to make myself vulnerable again, only to be rejected. But as I stood there, looking at his rigid form, something inside me softened. "Dad," I said quietly. He stiffened slightly at the sound of my voice, as if he hadn't expected me to approach him. For a long moment, there was only silence between us. He didn't turn around. He didn't speak. He didn't even acknowledge that I was there. I swallowed hard, the words thick in my throat, but I couldn't walk away without at least trying to get some kind of answer. "I know you don't get it," I said softly, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. "I know you probably never will, but I just need you to know, I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not even asking for your approval anymore. I just want you to understand that I did what I did because it was the right thing to do, and I can't regret it. I won't." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, like they didn't quite belong. And for a second, I thought he wouldn't answer, that I had done it again, spoken, but never truly been heard. But then slowly, he turned to face me. His expression was unreadable, his face hard with years of unspoken things. But something in his eyes had changed. I couldn't quite pinpoint it, but it was there. It wasn't understanding, not yet, but it wasn't the same coldness I had seen earlier either. For a long time, we stood there in silence, just looking at each other, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to fight him for something I would never get. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime of quiet, my father nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, "for saving those kids." I stared at him, the words sinking in, though they weren't quite what I had hoped to hear. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a grand gesture of reconciliation, but it was something. It was the first time he had acknowledged me without any anger, without any bitterness. I felt a strange lump form in my throat, but I pushed it down. "You don't need to thank me," I said, my voice steady, though I couldn't hide the small tremor that ran through it. "I did it because it was right, but I'm glad you're saying it." He looked at me for a long moment, the weight of the years between us hanging heavily in the space. And then, unexpectedly, he did something I hadn't seen in years. He gave a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of the distance that had always been there between us. He wasn't apologizing, but in that brief moment, I realized that the quiet, almost imperceptible shift, was the beginning of something different, something more. Maybe it wouldn't be enough to heal everything, but it was a step. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice low. "I always have been." I stood there, unable to speak for a moment. His words didn't undo the years of rejection, of silence, of bitterness, but they weren't meant to. They were just enough to remind me that, despite everything, I was still his daughter, and in some way, I always would be. "Thanks, Dad," I said quietly, meeting his gaze for the first time. "That means more than you know." We stood there for a moment longer, the noise of the celebration slowly fading into the background. My father gave me one last look before turning and walking back into the hall. I watched him go, the door closing softly behind him. As I stood there, alone in the fading light, I realized something. It wasn't a perfect moment, and it wasn't a happy ending, but it was a start, a shift, however small, in a relationship that had been broken for far too long, and that, for the first time in years, felt like enough. The days that followed the reunion were strangely quiet, filled with a heaviness I couldn't shake. I had thought that once I confronted my family, once the truth had been spoken, things would either change or collapse. But the aftermath felt like a long, slow exhale. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediate, just the slow settling of dust in a room that had been shaken too hard. The recognition from General Rhodes had been a moment of vindication, but it wasn't the kind of victory that filled the emptiness inside me. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff and hearing the echoes of your own voice without ever feeling the wind in your hair. My father's quiet acknowledgement had been more than I expected, but it wasn't enough to fill the years of silence that had existed between us. At night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling of my modest apartment, listening to the quiet hum of the farm outside. I had long since retreated to my land, away from the city and away from the noise of family events. The farm was my escape, my solace. The field stretched out in front of me like a blank canvas, a reminder that, no matter what happened with my family, I could still create something that was entirely mine. I had worked hard to build this place from the ground up, and there was peace in that, even if it was sometimes lonely. I had never been afraid of being alone, not in the way people thought, at least. My family always made it sound like loneliness was a punishment, like I was being punished for a decision I had made, leaving the military, choosing my own path over their expectations. But as the days turned to weeks, I realized it wasn't loneliness that had weighed me down all these years. It was the silence, the years of silence, the isolation they had imposed on me without even realizing it. I often thought back to Syria, to the decision that had changed everything. It had been so clear in the moment, the only choice I could make. The mission had been a failure, yes, but I didn't think about the failure at the time. I thought about those kids, the ones trapped in the crossfire, the ones who had been forgotten by everyone except for me. I could still see their faces in my mind, their wide eyes, their fingers clutching at my uniform as I carried them to safety. 43 children, and they were alive because I had made the call. I had defied orders to save them, and in the end, I had lost everything: my career, my reputation, and my place in my family's world. But the truth had always been clear to me. I had done the right thing. That was all that mattered. And yet, the legacy of that decision still lingered. Quiet, constant, like the hum of the fields at night. I sat on the porch one evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. The silence of the evening was comforting in its own way, but the weight of everything still hung over me. I thought of the words General Rhodes had spoken, how they had corrected the family's narrative, at least publicly. But would they ever truly understand? Would they ever truly see the truth? My father's quiet nod at the reunion had been a moment of recognition, but I knew it wasn't an apology. He had seen the truth of my actions, but he still couldn't fully embrace it. That wasn't the man he had been raised to be. He had been raised on loyalty to the military, to honor, to tradition. To admit that I had done something right, that I had chosen the children over the mission, meant admitting that the system, the very thing he had fought for, had been flawed, and that I realized was something he couldn't do. Not yet, at least. I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn his approval, trying to make him proud, all the missions I had completed, all the awards I had received. None of it had ever been enough. Not until I had chosen the lives of 43 children over the rules. Only then, when the price had already been paid, did they start to understand. But I didn't need them to understand. Not anymore. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath. The cool evening air wrapped around me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. The truth, no matter how long it had taken, had been spoken. I had fought for what was right, and that fight would live on in the quiet memories of those I had saved. I wasn't sure if my family would ever truly forgive me. I wasn't sure if they would ever understand my decision, but I realized something in that moment. I didn't need them to. The truth had already been written. My legacy, the one that had been erased, had finally been acknowledged by someone who understood it. And as long as that truth lived on, I didn't need anyone else to validate it. I sat there for a long time, watching the stars slowly begin to fill the sky. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding from the past. I had created something that was mine, and that was enough. The farm, the quiet, the space to breathe, it was all I needed now. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of peace I had been searching for all along. The past was over. The future was mine to define. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally ready to step forward. The legacy of silence was over. Days turned to weeks, and life on the farm settled back into its rhythm. The mornings were spent tending to the land, feeding the animals, and fixing up the barn. The evenings, quiet and still, offered a respite from the chaos of the past. There were no more family reunions, no more awkward encounters with my father or brother. I had retreated into this life I had built for myself, where the only expectations were my own. But then one day, I found the letter. It was sitting on my kitchen counter, the envelope crinkled and yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was familiar. too familiar, and my heart skipped a beat as I recognized the name, Dad. I hadn't heard from him since the reunion, not directly. My father had always been the kind to bottle up his emotions, to let years of silence build like an unspoken wall between us. I had assumed that was how it would remain. I had thought the small acknowledgement at the ceremony, his quiet nod, was as far as he was willing to go. But this letter, this was something different. This was an attempt to reach out. I stared at the envelope for a long time, unsure of whether I should open it, unsure if I even wanted to. After everything, after the years of estrangement, the hurtful words, the long silence, did I really want to go back to that? But something inside me pushed me forward, a deep yearning for closure, for understanding. I tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter, the familiar scent of old paper hitting my nose. Evelyn, it began. I'm not good at this. I never have been. But I need you to know that I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I said to you, and about the choice you made in Syria. The words felt strange to read, like they didn't quite belong in the world I had created for myself. My father, the man who had always been so distant, so steadfast in his silence, was trying to reach me. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me, something I couldn't quite define. I can't say that I fully understand it, he continued, and I can't say I ever will. But what I do know is that you made a choice that saved lives. And for that, I'm proud of you. Not for what it cost you, but for what it meant to the people you saved. I sat back, the words sinking in. There it was finally, the acknowledgement I had longed for, not just from the general or from the world, but from him, from my father. It wasn't a perfect apology, it wasn't an epiphany, but it was enough. I should have said more to you before, he wrote. I should have supported you, even if I didn't agree with your decision. But I was scared, Evelyn. I was scared of what it would mean if I accepted the reality of your actions. You were my daughter, and I thought I had to protect you. I thought I had to keep you in line, to keep you safe, but I didn't see what I was doing to you in the process. His words hit me harder than I expected. The realization that my father had been scared of losing control, scared of the consequences of my choices, made something inside me crack wide open. Maybe he hadn't been rejecting me all these years. Maybe he had just been trying to protect me in the only way he knew how, even if it was suffocating. I don't know if I can fix what's been broken between us, the letter continued. But I want to try. I don't expect everything to go back to the way it was. I'm not asking for that. But I'd like to see you again, not as a soldier or a general, but as my daughter. If you're willing to meet me halfway, I'll be there. I read the words over and over, the weight of them settling heavily in my chest. He wanted to meet me halfway. He wanted to make an attempt, even if it was a small one. I had expected so little from him. But this felt like more than I could have ever hoped for. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew what I had to do. I had spent so many years running, so many years building walls between us. But maybe it was time to take a step forward. Maybe it was time to see if we could build something new from the wreckage of the past. I stood up, my heart pounding, and walked toward the kitchen counter. I grabbed the pen and paper I kept beside the phone, the ones I had used for writing bills or grocery lists. But now they were for something far more important. I wrote simply, no grand speeches, just the truth. Dad, I began, I'm willing to try. The words were small, but they were a start. The letter was a small bridge, fragile but real. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely alone in this world. I sealed the envelope, staring at it for a moment before placing it on the counter. The decision had been made. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew that I was ready to take this next step, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The silence that had once felt suffocating was starting to fade, and though I didn't know what would happen next, I was ready to face whatever came with open eyes. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of the past holding me down. I had made my peace. Now it was time to see what came next. The days after I sent the letter felt strange, like I was waiting for something to happen but not entirely sure what it was. I kept myself busy on the farm, feeding the animals, mending fences, cleaning out the barn. There was a sense of peace in the routine, in the simplicity of the work. The land didn't demand much from me, except my hands and my time. I didn't hear anything from my father right away, and part of me had braced for the possibility that he might never reply. After all, years of silence don't just disappear overnight, and I had to admit, The idea of trying again after all this time made me nervous. What if it wasn't enough? What if the damage had already been done, too deep to fix? Still, I told myself to be patient. I had no expectations. If he was ready, he would reach out. And then, one morning, a knock at my door startled me out of my thoughts. I opened it to find a familiar face standing on my porch. It was Daniel, my brother. For a moment, I was frozen. I hadn't seen him since the reunion, and we hadn't spoken much since then. But here he was, standing in front of me, looking a little older than I remembered, a little more burdened. His expression was unreadable, but I could tell this wasn't a visit of just casual pleasantries. "Evelyn," he said, his voice almost tentative. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him in, and led him to the small kitchen where I had been drinking my coffee. I gestured for him to sit, but he didn't immediately take a seat. Instead, he lingered, his hands in his pockets, shifting uncomfortably from one foot to the other. "You look good," he said after a moment, as if trying to make small talk. "The farm's treating you well." I nodded, trying to mask the awkwardness of the situation. "Yeah, it's quiet, peaceful. Better than the alternative, I suppose." He didn't seem to know what to say to that, so after a few beats of silence, he finally spoke again. "Dad got your letter." My heart skipped a beat, and I glanced at him, waiting for the rest of the story. And he didn't know what to do with it at first. Daniel said slowly, as if weighing his words carefully. "He's not great with emotions, you know that?" I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. My father had never been the type to express anything openly. The few times I had seen him vulnerable felt like monumental events, so I didn't expect much. But the fact that he had read it, that he hadn't just dismissed it, meant something. "Anyway," Daniel continued, clearing his throat, "he asked if I would come talk to you. He's not ready to meet in person yet, but he's trying. He said he doesn't know how to fix things, but he wants to, and he's sorry, Evelyn, for what he did, for not being there. He just doesn't know where to start." His words hung in the air, and I felt a mix of emotions crash over me. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that after all this time, my father was truly willing to try again. But there was still that small voice in the back of my mind that told me not to get my hopes up. "Did he tell you that?" I asked quietly, meeting Daniel's eyes. He nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah, he said he wanted you to know that he's not proud of the way things have been, but he's willing to try. He doesn't know if you'll ever forgive him, but he wants to make things right, and he's ready to take that first step." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat thickening. For years, I had imagined 1,000 scenarios of what this moment would be like. I had imagined confronting my father, forcing him to see me, to admit the wrongs he had done. But the reality was quieter, more subdued. It wasn't about grand apologies or sweeping declarations. It was about two people, separated by years of hurt, standing on the edge of something new, something fragile and uncertain, but full of possibility. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this was the beginning of something truly different or if it was just another step in a long process. But for the first time, I felt like the possibility of reconciliation wasn't out of reach. "I don't know if I'm ready to meet him yet," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'll think about it. I'm willing to try too. I just need time." Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Take all the time you need, but I think you'll find that sometimes it's worth it. To try, to see if it's possible to fix things. I didn't think it was with you, but here we are, right?" I didn't know what to say to that. The truth was, I didn't want to risk my heart again. I didn't want to open the door only to have it slammed shut in my face. But the truth also lingered there, like the soft light that filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over everything. Maybe it was worth it. Maybe I could afford to try. "Thanks for coming," I said finally, my voice steadier now. "I'll think about it. Tell him I'll reach out when I'm ready." Daniel gave me a small, understanding smile. "You're welcome. I'll let him know. Take care of yourself, Evelyn." As he left, I stood there, watching him walk back down the porch steps. My heart was full of hope, full of fear, but mostly full of the realization that something had shifted inside me. I was willing to take a chance, and that, for the first time in years, felt like a victory. The silence that had once been suffocating was finally beginning to fade. Maybe reconciliation wasn't a destination. Maybe it was just a journey, one step at a time. And with that, I took my first step forward, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready to face it. I poured myself another cup of coffee, sat back down at the kitchen table, and stared out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden light over the fields. For the first time, I didn't feel alone.